Okay, we're ready to go. If you haven't got a drink, please do go to the back of the room and get yourself a drink. If you've had a drink and you feel like another one, then now's the time to do that. Okay, let's get things started. Thanks very much for coming. First of all, I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'll be moderating tonight. My name's Justin McCurry. I'm the Japan and Korea correspondent for The Guardian, and until a few months ago for The Observer, but no longer. Some of you who are interested in the media industry will know that The Guardian no longer owns The Observer. I'm also the editor of the #1 Shimbun, which is the monthly magazine of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. I'd encourage you all, whether you're a member of the club or not, to get in touch with me. There's an email address on the website. If you have any story ideas, always looking for new writers. So that's enough about me. I'll briefly introduce tonight's panelists. So on my far left, appropriately enough,
Exactly.
David McNeil. David's a professor at the University of the Sacred Heart in Tokyo. He's also are you co-editor or editor of the Asia Pacific Journal?
I'm an editor.
Right, an editor at the Asia Pacific Journal.
On the board of it.
David used to write for The Economist and The Independent. Now he's in academia, but you can still read his reporting in the Irish Times.
Correct.
And then to my left, Dan Sloan. Dan is president of the Foreign Correspondents Club. He's also an adjunct professor at Temple University, Japan, and he formerly worked at Reuters and Knight Ridder. He's a graduate of Columbia Graduate School of Journalism and the University of Virginia. And to my immediate right, Matt J. Wilson. Matt is dean and president of Temple University's Japan campuses, including one I learned this evening that did it recently open in Kyoto?
In January.
In January, okay, so not that long ago. And then at the end of the table, Isabel Reynolds, an old colleague of mine from our days at the Daily Yomiuri, now known as the Japan News. Isabel is now the Tokyo bureau chief of Bloomberg, the company that helped topple the British ambassador to Washington last week. And she's also a former president of the FCCJ. So now that I've done the introductions, I'd just also like to thank the associate member liaison chairs, co-chairs, Simon Farrell and David Umeda, for organising what I hope will be a lively and useful evening. What we're going to do to start with is I'll ask each of the panelists just to spend a couple of minutes or so making more of a detailed introduction. My introductions were very brief. They've all had long and illustrious careers in journalism and academia, and crucially for us, our audience tonight, they've spent many years here in Japan. So we'll ask them to introduce themselves in a bit more detail, and then I'll give you some guidance on the Q&A and comment session after the introduction. So should we go in the same order as my intros? David, do you want to start things off? Thanks.
Well, I'm an academic now. I still write for a newspaper called the Irish Times. But I had this kind of odd career trajectory because I started off as an academic in the UK. I was a professor at a university in Liverpool. And then when I came to Japan, I started freelancing. I freelanced for most of my career, and I ended up writing for the Independent newspaper in the UK, and then for The Economist for the last 8 years or so. And I kind of watch and observe what's happening into journalism at the moment. I think we're in a very kind of odd and worrying phase for journalism because there's never been a sort of a greater need for fact-based, accurate journalism, but the industry itself seems to be crumbling. You know, the sort of financial part of the industry, advertising, the old industry, seems to be falling apart, and that's something that causes me nightmares, and maybe we can talk about that in addition to AI, one of the other issues I think which will come up tonight. Thank you.
Dan. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Justin, and thanks to everybody for attending tonight. We are an organization, this is our 80th anniversary. We try to provide relevant and important events for our community, but sometimes we don't get the message out quickly enough or broadly enough, and I thank you all for this great response this evening. My background was, like two of the folks on the panel, my first journalism job actually was in trade journalism, but I was at the Yomiuri for about 6 months as well. Ran like hell. No, but I'm joking. And then I eventually started working at a wire service, the Night Ritter, which was kind of, as most entities still, or even at that time, were focused on business in Japan. And then I switched to Reuters for most of my professional journalistic career. But before I left Reuters, I started teaching actually at Komazawa University, which had a global studies program in the evening. It was kind of small, and it was, I think, just kind of a glorified English language entity that didn't really have a kind of a focus on what journalism or media studies was, but just had a brief. I had a long break. I started teaching at another university, and more recently have started teaching at Temple in the communications department. I have worked with people who have matriculated through universities with journalism programs and without journalism programs over 20 plus years in journalism. And so I think the insight perhaps I can offer, both as an instructor and someone who's worked with the people who've graduated from these programs, are what's working and what arguably will be the next stages of education ahead.
Thanks, Dan. Matt.
Great. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with this really incredible group of talented individuals, both here as part of this panel and for those of you that are here in the audience. I just am truly in awe of being here this evening. By way of background, I tell folks that I'm a 7-year-old trapped in a 55-year-old body, and with that energy, I am out trying to make a difference in the world of academia right now. So by profession, an international lawyer, and 2003 kind of made the transition into the world of academia with Temple University's Japan campus. Temple University is based in Philadelphia, a major public institution. I'm ranked in the top 45 in the United States, globally top 400. And I initially taught law. And Temple has a campus here in Tokyo, has had one for 43 years, was the first foreign university to come into Japan. In the 1980s and 1990s, there were about 36 or 37 foreign universities that came in. If you look around, they're all gone. And Temple's motto is "Perseverance Conquers," and Temple truly has persevered. Right now, as you heard, I'm president and dean of the Japan campus of Temple University, and it's been an incredible ride. I have not been with Temple during my entire academic career. One day I woke up, I was president of a university in the state of Ohio, the University of Akron. Another day I woke up, I was president of a university in Missouri, and about 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years, it was August 30th of 2020, the borders were closed to all foreigners. Somehow I got on a plane. There was not a cello case involved. And I was able to make my way into Japan. And over the last 3 years, 5 years, we've more than tripled in size, despite the fact that the borders were closed. And so now with undergraduate and graduate programs, we have about 3,600 students from 90 different countries. 40% from the US, 30% from Japan, and 30% from the rest of the world. And as you heard, we just opened a campus in Kyoto. So I think Temple's the first university that ever has had an overseas branch campus, that opened its own branch campus. But I'm president over both of those as well. I can't say that I've had the career in journalism, but I sure have I've been able to oversee a lot of students, work with really incredible professors that have been in that industry as well. One really just interesting fact, I have done a newscast on NBC Cleveland, the first night of the Winter Olympics. So if anybody's ever interested in that story, that's the interesting fact for the day. And I'm looking forward to talking about artificial intelligence, because not only does that impact the world of journalism, but it's having an incredible impact on education in general. And so I have plenty of thoughts to share about what that means, what the role and responsibility is of educators as well, and look forward to the conversation tonight.
Thanks, Matt. Isabel.
Hi, thanks very much for coming tonight. My name is Isabel Reynolds. I'm the Bloomberg Bureau Chief here in Tokyo. To explain a little bit more about my career, I haven't only worked at the Daily Yomiuri. I started out actually at working for the Japanese TV company TBS in London in the 1990s. So I have a lot of experience working within a Japanese media organization, which, believe me, is very different from a Western media organization. And then when I came to Tokyo, I worked at the Daily Yomiuri. I worked with Dan at Reuters for about 11 years, and I've been at Bloomberg for about 14 years, so you can figure out how old I am. I wanted to say a little bit about Bloomberg. I don't know how many of you are very familiar with it. I know in Japan it's often seen as a bit of a niche sort of organization, but we actually are the biggest foreign media organization in Tokyo by far at this point. Reuters are not here today, so I can I can say that freely without looking mean. We take on new graduates almost every year. We have interns every summer, so I'm part of their sort of training and development in that sense, and I'm part of the sort of panel who select the people who come in every year. So if anyone wants any insight into what we're looking for in those people, then I'd be happy to talk about that.
Great. Thanks, Isabel. I'm a very poor moderator because I've done all of those introductions, and one thing I didn't do was give you or remind you of the title of the theme of tonight's session, the role of educating future journalists based in Japan. Now, I've been a journalist based in Japan for, you're going to be able to guess how old I am now. I started at the Daily Yomiuri, as it was called then, in the mid-90s. Late 90s, sorry. Went back to the UK for a bit. I started working at The Guardian about 22 years ago. It doesn't feel that long. My job has changed beyond recognition in that time, which is perhaps something we can all talk about a bit later. But I think when I was thinking about what to say this evening, it sort of struck me that I think since the first printing press was invented, journalism has had to adapt very quickly to change. It always seems that we're being buffeted by technological change, the state of the economy, state of finance, diplomacy, and now is definitely no different. It seems the problem is these days it seems like we're having to rethink our role on an increasingly regular basis, and that's why I think and I hope that tonight's discussion will be really useful for everyone here. So I guess we all come from sort of, most of us will come from quite traditional journalist backgrounds. I certainly do. And now I find that the job I do is being changed by AI, which we'll talk about in more detail. Another thing as well, commercially, journalism is experiencing tough times, and that age-old puzzle of how to monetize our content. Now the genie's out the bottle. People got used to reading newspapers online for free, and then suddenly some of them went behind a paywall. So how to do that without losing a big chunk of your readership or your viewership is another big challenge that we certainly think about a lot at the Guardian. Well, anyway, that's my two penneth or yeneth. The ability to come up with absolutely awful puns is great if you want to be a headline writer. There's one to start you off. Tonight we won't do this like a regular press conference, so please do ask questions, ask difficult questions if you like, but also feel free to make comments if you haven't got a question or you're still thinking of one. And then what I'll do is ask one or more of the panelists to respond. But do follow press conference protocol by giving us your name and your affiliation. Try to keep questions to one at a time, and then when we've done a first round of questions, I'm sure we're going to have time for additional rounds later on. So, without further ado, does anyone have a question to ask our panel? Don't be shy.
I can get us started.
Dave, could you come and just
Okay.
for the video? I think it's best if you speak into the microphone.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, as we all know, there's been quite a contraction in the industry, and I'm just wondering how you see that at the ground level of education. Has this made it hard to fill your classrooms? Are you doing anything to attract students to it? And when students do come into your classroom, do you? Sorry, is this good? Am I good?
Yeah.
Is this thing on? Okay. Yeah, when they do come in, I mean, do you have a presentation that you make to them about careers and say, like, look, there's a good chance you're not going to make it or whatever? Do you give them that talk? Or do you say, look, it's a great industry, it's rewarding, blah, 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 blah? How do you get them excited about it, while being realistic about the prospects? That'd be my question.
Great, thanks very much. Should we put that question to our two panelists who teach journalism? Yeah, Dave.
Well, it's a good question. In the UK, when I was there, we taught something called media studies. And media studies had a practical component. And the assumption was that a large number of those students would go into the industry, into journalism or into the media industry. In practice, a lot of them went into PR, which is not quite the same thing. But we were training people for the media. What I've found since I came to Japan is that I teach less media studies and journalism, although that's a component. What I tend to do is teach media literacy, which is a way of saying to students, look, you probably won't end up getting a job. And actually very few students aspire to a job, in my experience, aspire to having a job as a journalist. It's a small number. Every year, roughly 1 or 2 of my students end up in the media, actually working in the media. That's in Japan. I have 1 at NHK. I think I have 1 or 2 at Bloomberg, 1 at every one of the agencies. But what I find works better for the students now is to say to them, what I'm trying to do is discuss with you how the media works, how can we interpret the media, how do we sort out, for example, fake news from real news, and that kind of reflective approach works best, rather than me saying to them, I'm training you for a career in journalism. And I think that if they take what I say seriously, and if they take the discussions in class seriously, it can be a useful grounding for the industry. But I don't wave a flag and say, I'm going to train you to work, at Bloomberg.
I would say a kind of a delineation, and there are a number of schools in Japan, Japanese universities as well, that have graduate degrees in journalism. I think they are more focused, or their focus, as well as the United States, is on being a kind of a ladder, stepping stone to a vocation, professional career in journalism, where the undergraduate environment is much more to kind of whet appetites, to offer exposure in communications and journalism, media studies, in the broad number of schools that teach it. And as a instructor, your job is sometimes to kind of give anecdotal history of, I was here, or, this I experienced, and other aspects of that. But, your expectation is not that these individuals have chosen journalism as their futures yet. Some of them are, deeply interested, going back, way back in time, and I think Isabel remembers this young man, I hope. His name was Chris Myers. He was a Temple University journalism student in the early aughts, maybe even the late 1990s. And we have a scholarship program for journalists here. And he submitted a video entry about like Japan's wild vending machines, kombini. And it was something that, it was a story well told. I'm sure it was managed by the communications department at the time. It wins the scholarship prize. He applies to Reuters and is hired and becomes a quite distinguished, unfortunately he's passed away, but he became a quite distinguished video journalist for Reuters. So I think, if anything, the instructor's brief on an undergraduate level is to excite people about the potential of journalism, the vocation, not dissuade them about the financial hardships and realities that are going on in essentially a contracting industry, but rather whether this meets their own interest, passions, skill sets, and, if you can, introduce them to their potential future.
Thanks, Dan. Matt, do you have anything to?
Sure. One of the things that's interesting is, as I look at least our student body here in Japan, there's a couple things. One, I've got 12 majors. The most popular major is international business. Number 2 is communications. And so that's really telling to me. And then as you peel back the communications majors, what do they want to do? I don't have a lot of students, at least, sharing that they want to go into the profession of journalism. So much of it is video production. We naturally, as part of the core, want to expose them to journalism, journalistic principles, those type of things. But we have regularly students that are coming out that are becoming journalists, here in Japan or elsewhere. They tend to be coming out of our international affairs department, which is really interesting, right? So it's not somebody's thinking, I want to go in and become a journalist and I major in this and this is what I'm going to do. But it's really somebody who didn't think about that, that is wrapped up in global affairs, that they have their eyes open to the difference that they can make in the world through investigative reporting by going and getting the truth out and doing those type of things as well. So, the conversation is not happening with that demographic, with that student, but they're finding an attraction to that, and hopefully we're giving them the tools to be able to go and to pursue an incredible career in this realm.
Thanks, man. Isabel, have you got anything to add to that?
I think, I hate to say this because it sounds a bit like crowing, but when we talk about careers in journalism sort of becoming few and far between, Bloomberg's lucky enough to have a different business model. So we're not sort of searching down the back of the sofa for change to pay our journalists. We have the funds to fund really good journalism and to pay journalists well. So we have no shortage of people applying to be interns. We also have, obviously, we're a larger financial organization that has a news department. So when we bring interns in, often there'll be 1 or 2 who come in as interns to a different department, but they really want to come into news. So that, they will join Bloomberg, some other part of the Bloomberg organization, and seek to get into news from there as well. So that's how keen people are to get into Bloomberg News.
Does anyone in the audience have anything what they want to add on that subject? Because it seems like, it's important to differentiate between sort of media studies and a sort of a hands-on journalism course. And I just wondered, I don't know much, to my shame, about the that sector in among Japanese universities. Is there anyone here who teaches either media studies or journalism in Japan who has something to add about that, on that particular subject? Dave?
Sorry to follow up, I just want to say that I had pretty much...
I think do we need to just pass the microphone around maybe so that we...
Sorry.
we capture everything on the film.
Yeah, I had exactly the same response as David, the other David. I was teaching a course at Temple, actually, while I was at Bloomberg. And one of the reasons Bloomberg let me do that, they have a rule against moonlighting. But they let me do it because they said, hey, maybe we can recruit some people from Temple. They come to your course, you can get a sense of whether they're any good or not or whatever. But the reality was that I did it for like 6 or 8 years, and it started to really tail off, the number of students. And they were like, hey, you don't have enough students to have a course. And so we put our heads together and we decided to change it to, it was just Financial News 101, something like that. And then we changed it to Financial Media Literacy. And that worked. We actually got more students. And it was also more fun to teach in a way. It was less hardcore. The financial news thing was pretty hardcore. You have to learn a bit about finance and writing, both tough subjects to teach in a short. This was the extended education, or what's it called? Occupation.
Continuing education.
Continuing education, yeah, program like that. But we had the same response. So I guess if I could just get in another quick question, I wonder how do you teach media literacy? Like, how do you teach that?
Well, so what I can say to my students is, look, I can teach you how to write an article, or I can, teach you how to write a feature or something like that. But a lot of these students don't even write English very well, right? So that's not going to be an option. But what I can say is, look at the stories around you. Look at the Johnny Kitagawa story, for example, right? They're all J-pop fans, or K-pop fans, and they know who Johnny Kitagawa is. So, I can ask them a question, which I do sometimes at the start of the semester. Well, what happened there? Why did the mainstream media take so long to report on the Johnny Kitagawa story? When I came to Japan 22, 3 years ago, I heard about it. I wrote about it, but why did it take so long for NHK, for example, to pick up the slack, right? So what's going on there? And that sort of asks the students to think reflectively about not only the role of the media, like why do we need the media? Well, one concrete reason is because it exposes the powerful, it monitors and exposes them, and it holds them accountable, or it can do, It's the voice of people who don't have any voice. And also it allows them to think about advertising, for example. What's the role of advertising? What prevents the media from doing its job? What are the financial constraints? Self-censorship. There's a whole bunch of things you can talk about there with students who might not be interested in a career in journalism, but who do understand a contemporary issue, and they do understand through that why we need proper journalism. That's one way of doing it.
Thank you. Let's have another question from the floor. Yeah.
Hi, Doug Montgomery, Temple University, Japan. Actually, I want to build on the last comment. So, if I think, and I forget her name, is it Alex Cooper, the podcast lady, the Call Me Daddy? Is that her name? Is it Alex Cooper? Yeah. Yeah, Alex Cooper. So Alex Cooper, allegedly becomes one of the most important people in the election last year because she takes in Trump and Kamala Harris doesn't go, right? So she has incredible power as a journalist, but she, I'm assuming, I don't know this, didn't study journalism, right? So I think you mentioned it, Matt, like these people kind of going into journalism or going into reporting, going into influencing public discourse on a very important topic aren't journalists. So what can we do to make sure that they have media literacy, they know how to fact check and all these kind of things? Because they're not necessarily coming out of journalism school. They could be coming over video editing, and they're just really good at video editing, and they got 10 million followers, and there is Mr. Trump sitting in front of Alex Cooper. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if there's a question in there, but maybe you guys can comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's really at the crux of a lot of what we need to talk about this evening. You don't need to have been hired by a major media organization to get your voice out there any longer. You like you say, if you're a skilled editor, you edit a video and you put it online, and who knows what happens next. So how do we, and as for sort of due diligence and media literacy, perhaps quite a lot of influencers aren't interested in being media literate. That's not the point of what they do. That's just a personal opinion. But how would the panelists like to respond to that? Because it really is a major part of the entire media landscape these days. Dan, do you want to address that first?
Sure. Wow. I think the bottom line, and again, things that we discuss in class is, what do you place value in? What do you place trust in? And if you're thinking about journalism education and someone's been successful circumventing that process, how do you make it still seem like it's worth your time and money to go that place? You know, to invest in being better and having a stronger foundation in what you do. There are professional skills like video editing and video production, which schools teach. But to David's point, and just in general, the critical thinking, the kind of journalistic ethics, which we do teach, actually Temple teaches, these are things that inherently, if we value this institution or this vocation, we have to have a kind of a swim lane that gives people these skill sets. Yeah.
But it's everybody, right? Like, so it could be the art student, it could be.
So critical thinking, to my mind, is taught without a kind of a comms or journalism, big branding now. We want people who are curious. We want people who question. In life, I think, in society, in democracy. But, as a professional skill set, people who are kind of not proactive, not curious, it's the wrong job for them. But the point I think what you're getting at is, sometimes people make it because they're great entertainers or they've got their shtick down. And that's, journalism is about infotainment, information and entertainment. As an education, our function should be not necessarily making people great entertainers, but giving them the professional skills, the critical thinking, that they can be the best of, and this is a long diatribe that I won't go into, the traditional media and the social media kind of nuances of what's evolved.
All right. Let me jump in. I could talk about this for like 3 hours. And I'll try not to spend 3 hours. But there's a couple of things in there, right? So one, Justin talked about the challenges that the media have in monetizing. I think the influencers that we're talking about, they have figured out how to monetize, right? Because it's how many views, it's how many clicks, and I'm going to go ahead and get paid. And so there really has this new platform has come where people are thinking, I don't need an education, right? I don't need to be trained. I can just go on, and if I get 1 million followers, I've got TikTok, I've got YouTube, I've got whoever that's going to pay me. And there's not going to be a paywall or anything along those lines, right? And so, as we think about the future, is there some type of a lesson in there? That's kind of point one, right? Point two, when you think about it on more of a macro level, 37,000 feet, above, there's a number of things, and this kind of segues into even the role of education at all levels, whether it's K through 12, whether it's higher education, whether it's even at the home, at the dinner table, right, in terms of challenging the propositions of the accuracy of information, right? Father of four, every time we would have a conversation with my girl and boys, they would bring me some type of fact, and I would fact check them. Now, that's not going to happen, at most households, but, I would say, where'd you get that from, right? And they would come up, and, naturally it was Wikipedia. And I said, okay, so what's the source of Wikipedia, right? And it got to the point, at least in our home, that they would come equipped with ammunition in terms of, okay, what is the real fact that's out there? I started to talk a lot as a university president about the role of higher education and schools in general. And within that particularly, and this is going to segue in a little bit to this world of AI or artificial intelligence, I actually talk in terms of AI, RI, GI, and PI. Those are my 4 prongs that I'm building on. Artificial intelligence, you can't escape it. It's like, how do you use it? And again, that's another 3-hour conversation like along those lines, right? My RI is real information, right? In terms of what is real, what are the facts? And as educators, we need to be teaching our folks, one, how to extract the facts, how to spot the facts, how to identify those facts, and then how to be able to confirm those, because AI is going to spit out all this information, right? But at the end of the day, AI is just collecting from what's online. It's not verifying accuracy. It's amazing to me, playing with AI like I do, it makes up quotes, right? You know, it brings in information that doesn't even exist. In my world of law, there was recently a story about a lawyer who relied on AI to go and do this brief to present to the court. There was no validity in any of that. The cases, the precedent did not exist, right? So as an educator, I talk to my faculty, you know, I talk to students about, okay, it's all about RI, right? AI, we can use it, but RI, you can't escape it. The GI is global intelligence, right? You know, being able to transcend borders, because in today's world, with the internet, media, whatever it is, I mean, we could spend another 3 hours on that topic as well, but I don't think anybody's going to discount, despite the anti-globalist voices that are out there today, that globalism is here. We're never escaping it, and it's something that someone has to be globally aware. They need to be globally sensitive. And then the PI is the practical intelligence, right? And that's what we try and do with many of our faculty who are here or will be watching online or whatever. But the practical intelligence is, I mean, that's where your critical thinking skills come in, right? That's where your communication skills come in. That's where your investigative journalism comes in. And that's something that not only at the education level, because we can only educate so many folks, but that's what we need to be putting out there in terms of, look, you know, this is what's important. You can't rely on things. I remember when I first stood up actually, talking to my faculty about ChatGPT. They didn't realize what it was. It was just breaking. I'm an intellectual property lawyer by trade, and so that was on my radar, and I walked into a faculty meeting, I remember it well, a couple of years ago in January, and I talked to my faculty, said, how many of you have heard of ChatGPT? And you know, I had 2 hands go up, and I said, well, let's get online right now, and I'm going to show you how this works. And one of my faculty raises his hand, and he said, this is like God. You know, it just, you know, you ask the question, you say the prayer, and boom, it spits the answer out to you. And he went on to explain that how do you counteract what is coming out, because it's so instantaneous. He's like, my students are going to believe in the veracity and the credibility of this information just because they put something into the machine and the machine spit it out. And we had that conversation about, okay, it has to be more than that. We need to be doing a better job teaching folks. And so one of the recommendations that I actually made to my professors was, you know, hey, let your students use AI, for instance, right? Give them a prompt, have the students write a paper using AI, but your assignment is to go out and fact check every single sentence in that report, in that paper, in that article that has been written by AI to see whether or not it's credible or not. That's how you teach. That's how the students learn. That's how they're gonna do that as well. So anyway, I don't know if that gets to what you were talking about, but I do think there's a monetization thing. I also think that whether it's the AI, the RI, the GI, and the PI, that there's an incredible role that we need to all play as educators, as journalists, as media specialists when it comes to these things.
Thanks, Matt. Isabel, I mean, given that Bloomberg's had a few very high-profile scoops in recent weeks, I wondered if you could, obviously without giving away any company secrets, if you could talk a little bit about how Bloomberg goes about ensuring that its stories, particularly more controversial stories, are absolutely watertight.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the way we go about getting scoops, I mean, luckily that's nothing to do with AI. It's all about personal relationships. So our best reporters are people who are always out of the office. They're always meeting someone. They're building relationships throughout Tokyo in all sorts of sectors. So luckily, we're not relying on Wikipedia for any facts there. But yeah, we are very strict about accuracy. That is one of the upsides of being a financial news agency. We can't afford to get anything wrong. Otherwise, we could be sued for an enormous amount of money. So we have our team of lawyers. They go through everything that we write. We always make sure, for example, that we get comments. If it's, for example, a lot of the scoops that we get, not something about Peter Mandelson, but
Lord Peter Mandelson.
Pete, Mandy. A lot of the scoops that we get are things about one company buying another. So, I mean, one of the basic things is we've got to have somebody from both sides saying that this is happening, for example. That's one of the things that we'd always have to have. But yes, we just spend a huge amount of time and money with lawyers making sure everything is right. But at a lower level, everything we put out basically goes through. We always have a second pair of eyes, as it were. So the reporter will write it, the editor will edit it, and somebody else will look, make sure there's nothing wrong. So the accuracy is hugely important for us.
But that's, I mean, can I just add something? Because I think that gets to the heart of, or at least one of the main points is that's all expensive, right? Like The Economist used to do the same thing. They used to have a room full of fact checkers, and they were really rigorous about it. Some of them had PhDs, they prided themselves. They would go every line of your copy, right? But The Economist had money, and Bloomberg has money. And the way that the industry is trending at the moment, it's taking away resources from lots of other media institutions, particularly the newspapers, but not just the newspapers, also TV. And, I feel like because the average age here, I don't want to guess it, but we're a little bit older, right? But, if you hear what kids are doing, it's amazing, right? They're all coming home with these YouTube channels that I've never heard of. Anybody ever heard of Mr. Beast?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, well, 'cause I never heard of Mr. Beast until 6 months ago. My kids are going, Mr. Beast, right? He does this. And they look at him for an hour or two every day. He interprets the world for them. And he's got like 200 million followers, I had the New York Times correspondent. I was out with him a couple of months ago. And he was going, how the New York Times has got 11 million subscribers now, online subscribers. And he was saying that's great. But Joe Rogan has how many? 11 million podcast views a day or something like that. He's never gone to journalism school, he just interviews people. And I feel like the technology and the finance is getting away from journalists, right? And one of the things I feel quite strongly about is that everybody should do media literacy. It shouldn't just be a handful of privileged students. It needs to be a subject that's taught not only in university, but in high school, because there's no other way to insulate you from what's going on.
Sorry, if I could just jump in.
Yeah, if you comment and then I'll come
Please,
back to you.
Doug. So when we're trying to, in my classes, delineate between traditional media, and social media. And when I say traditional media, I mean media that has a trust reputation with its audience. What I tell them the big difference is when you screw up in traditional media, you raise your hand and you say, we're issuing a correction. In social media, they zap the post, they pretend it didn't happen. Falsehoods, errors, they're just kind of ignored. And I really think that, to Isabel's point, there's no consequence for, in the world of the non-vested, vetted journalistic enterprise, for falsehoods. Literally, we see it a lot from both these social media entities and people who say something and the social media entity just puts it out as if it was fact. And so for the young people that we're teaching or who potentially are considering journalism as a career, it's, You know, the important thing is to admit when you screwed up, because that imbues trust in the enterprise. Not the era doesn't undermine it. It's rather, look, we got it wrong. We value you as an audience, and we want to make sure that trust continues.
Thanks. Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry. What? Yeah.
We're going to do
One
it
at a time.
By the way, he knows a lot, I'm telling you. But anyway, I just want to make a non-Debbie Downer point. I was teaching class at Temple last semester, and media literacy came up over and over and over again. Japanese girl in my class, she might be 18. I said, what age do you think you should be taught media literacy? You know what she said? Take a guess.
18?
12.
Okay, well, I agree.
She said it. Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
But she said it. 18-year-old Japanese lady said, we should be taught media literacy at 12,
Right.
which is a good, positive point for the future.
Can I just add one little point? I had a couple of students last semester who come up to me and said they like Donald Trump. I hate to say the T word in polite company, but it's out there. And I said, why? And they said, because he defends women. And I said, he defends women. Why do you? Right. So I said, and they were good students. I said, from what? And they said, pedophiles. Right? And I said, where did you get that from? And it was TikTok. Right? So there's these videos going into their feed, and it's they're not looking for them. Right? It comes into their feed through some kind of algorithm, and it completely inverts reality. Right? So, you know, I think I agree with your student. It needs to start a lot earlier to sort out what's fact from fake.
So you set me up nicely. So I want to try and tie all this. I'm Alan Walt from TV Rev. We are a U.S.-based publication. We cover the intersection of streaming television, advertising, and all of the changes that are happening in the industry. So I want to try and tie everything you have together and then come to a question. So you've established that there are fewer and fewer jobs in traditional journalism, and kids don't go into that. That a lot of times the alternative are people like Alex Cooper or Joe Rogan, who have zero journalistic training, and most of them don't even pretend to. At the same time, there's another thread, which you actually nicely queued up, of these TikTok news influencers. Now, there's a stat out there that 30% of people under 30 get their news from TikTok. And these are people who don't even know they're not doing things right. In other words, they will quote, they'll like read some Wall Street Journal story and not mention that that's where they actually got what they're reading from and whatnot, or they'll say that Donald Trump protects people from pedophiles. And so it seems that, and at the same time, we also see that a lot of mainstream journalists have left and realized there's not money in it, or are moving to things like Substack to try and get their careers jump-started. Derek Thompson from The Atlantic being the latest example. He wrote a book called Abundance with Ezra Klein, who's a New York Times journalist, and that's a really big deal now in the U.S., and he left The Atlantic to start a sort of a Substack, his own thing. So my question for you guys is, do you, as professors of this, owe it to the students to sort of teach them entrepreneurial skills with the understanding that you guys are going to have to go out and start your own careers and really jumpstart it, that you're not going to have the luxury of spending 5 or 10 years in a newsroom with people who will tell you what you're doing wrong and train you, and that can be the way to fight against people who become TikTok news influencers without having the slightest idea of what that actually means?
Great question. Who would like to take that on first? Okay, Matt.
So I mean, incredible points, right? In terms of bringing that full circle. Part of it is, I think, today's younger generation, it's going to depend on the person. They're going to figure that out themselves, right? It goes back to my first point, to Doug's comment. Where is the monetization? It's in those segments right now, right? And so one of the things that I even see is some people are just even abandoning education, thinking, well, I can just be entrepreneurial and I can go and I can engage in these platforms, and these platforms are going to pay me. And I mean, that's part of the narrative that comes into the TikTok feed is, hey, I made $10,000 this week, right? And if anybody's seeing that, it's like, well, geez, I don't need an education. I'm just going to go out and I'm going to do that. And it kind of becomes in this perpetual cycle, right, in terms of where that is. So before we even get to the point of teaching, I think they're figuring it out, right? The second point, though, is very along the lines, I think in today's world, and you see it, right, the disruption that's happening because of social media, because of the internet, now because of AI, it's taking your traditional careers and it's just flipping everything upside down, right? And so I do think there's a responsibility. I do think that there's a space, and I do think there's a necessity for us to be teaching these type of things, right? I mean, Dan talked about, ethics. I mean, that's part of it. I also think there needs to be entrepreneurialism, right? I think there needs to be really these conversations about, okay, looking beyond the traditional, because, I think Japan clings to the traditional pathways, but that's going to break down. We're going to start to see it. I think in the United States and elsewhere, those traditional pathways are starting to break down, right? And so when you have the breakdown, you have that uncertainty, you have chaos to a degree, something's got to fill that void. And I'm hoping that it's not chaos. I'm hoping that it can be creativity. Hopefully it can be something that, we can dwell on and to put it into those type of terms.
If I could. Yeah. So, again, I kind of spoke to this earlier, and following what the dean just said, I think historically, whether it's journalism or other things, graduate schools have been seen as the professional training center. So if you are an undergraduate in a liberal arts environment, or even if you major in business, it's not guaranteeing you a job in that career, or it's not, let's say, vocational enough to guarantee you a job. To your point, I think, and to what the dean just said, I think there's space now, maybe as a kind of a hybrid business journalism course in that space, some kind of self-entrepreneurial journalistic, idea, how to have a journalist online startup or something in that vein. It, for the most part, doesn't exist. Because I think historically and to this day, being a professional in journalism is often ceded, or training as a professional in journalism is ceded to the graduate school, still in Japan quite predominantly, because the expectation is, if I'm paying that much money in graduate school, I better get a job. Undergraduate, who knows? It's whoever gives me an interview.
David, did you want to say
I was
something?
just going to add something, because Japan's a sort of slightly special case, isn't it? Because there aren't that many schools that teach journalism.
Yeah.
Where you get your training is usually at the newspapers. And it's quite a rigorous kind of training, or the TV companies. But the problem is that the industry is shrinking here as well. I think there's 27 million fewer daily newspapers sold here than there was at the peak, which was the late 1990s. So what does the industry do, How does it cope with that? And then we see at the same time a sort of the creeping online phenomenon, right? We saw a couple of elections lately. I was just checking them. There was the Saito election, the Motihiko Saito election in Hyogo-ken, where most of the people who got their information got it from online. And especially you see politicians now targeting younger people, and they're using TikTok to do that, which means they bypass the normal kind of media checks and balances, the Q&A, the hard kind of graft of explaining your policies, right? So, Japan seems like a bit of a bubble in some ways, but I think these problems are coming. And that's why, again, I come back to this point that you have to try and start educating people quite young for what's coming, in my opinion.
Right. The reason I was asking is, in my work, I see a lot of times I'll bump into these kids who they're good writers, they're decent journalists, and I'm constantly going, don't give that to them for free. Make them pay for it. This is how you do this. There's the skill set that makes somebody a good social media influencer and the skill set that makes somebody a good journalist aren't often the same thing. And so if we gave these people the skill, the sort of knowledge to say, hey, this is how I actually run a business, this is what I'm worth, instead of, essentially we all, and it may not be true for you guys, too often journalism schools are training them to be freelancers if they're not going to get a job at a newspaper versus sort of doing it themselves.
Thanks. I really do like the idea of teaching media literacy from, was it age 12 was the consensus? Yeah, I guess that's around the age that a lot of kids, well, perhaps even younger, are really beginning to use their smartphones in that way.
But again, she recognized it.
Yeah.
She recognized
No, sure. Yeah.
Just apparently back row.
Yeah, the woman in the back had her hand up, I think.
Sorry, did somebody on the back row have their
Yeah.
hand up? Completely missed that. Sorry about that.
I think it's this. Her.
Does anyone want to raise their hand?
Yeah, right.
The lady at the back.
Here. Okay. Sorry.
Now we got more than that. Wasn't the person, was it?
I was just afraid of us hogging the conversation.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Aseliana Durbekova, and I came from Sofia University. I do the master's degree there, and I follow some of you via LinkedIn. This is how I know about this event. So I'm myself a researcher, and I'm from Kyrgyzstan. This is a Central Asian country, and there has been a lot of change in the media literacy and media freedom in general, like past 2 or 3 years since the takeover of the new authority there. But before it was an island of democracy, so we are suffering pretty much. But I'm not going to talk about this today. What I'm interested in is about the misinformation and disinformation, which is a big threat not just to the future global governance, but also to the institutional democracies. And for example, talking about the United Nations, we see that it's not just in the financial crisis, right? It also has some crisis in the way that people kind of trust in their reports and everything. So I have written here what I wanted to talk. So misinformation and disinformation, they're circulating on social media, and it's very good to say that we need to first divide the traditional media and then the social media, and also that there are like deeply entrenched ecosystems of commercial and political interests that they are sort of more interested in their own outcomes rather than in the overall well-being. So yeah, our time spent on social media, our attention is everything is monetized by the algorithms, and this is why we get what we got today, like in TikTok, or like how certain people are getting certain information and being influenced by them. So these impacts not just the vulnerable but also undereducated people the most. And so we should also highlight the cross-border nature of social media. And talking about it, I have a question about like the way we need to train the future journalists, like to help the curb big tech companies, the monopolies, to reduce the misinformation and disinformation, and to ensure the fair journalism, because in the end of the day, we do know what is the fair journalism about the ethics. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much for a great point. I think some of our panelists have touched on some of the points that you raised in your question, but there's a lot in there. Do any of the panelists want to add to what they've already said about how we somehow train journalists in such a way, and their audiences in such a way that they can sort the wheat from the chaff and are not left overly vulnerable to disinformation and misinformation?
But we do train. That's what journalism is. It's verification is one of the key tasks of a journalist, right? And you're trained in that. I don't think that's the big problem, to be honest, is training journalists. I think it's the.
I think, to be
It's
honest,
the
it's not
audiences,
something
yeah.
journalists can do. I mean, all these people have a platform out there. They can be putting things out. They don't care if they're true or not, as long as they get attention, as you say. It's got to be a question of the law. And even when it comes to the law, I mean, obviously, the laws depend on each individual country, and most of these social media spread across all sorts of different countries. So how do you even begin to control that? I think it's almost like a impossible task. But having said that, I think as the mainstream sort of traditional media, we have to just keep doing what we're doing and doing it properly, and these people have to keep doing their education in the way they do it. But the difference we make might be only very slight, to be honest. I mean, I don't see how we can stop it. I mean, I think these trends have always been there. I mean, you were talking about the Donald Trump interview with some podcaster, I guess.
I got it wrong. It was actually Kamala who spoke with Alex Cooper, but the same.
Right. So, but it's always been a tendency among sort of leaders. They don't want to have an interview with someone who's going to be hostile or combative. They would much rather do something that's easy and soft. So if they have the opportunity to do that, they will. And now they have just more opportunities to do that. So it's going to be harder for mainstream media to get their hands on an interview with those important people. But it still can be done. I mean, Bloomberg did an interview with Donald Trump a couple of years ago. It was very uncomfortable. Donald Trump left very unhappy. But it can still happen. But yeah, I mean, there is just there is a kind of fire hose of sewage out there, and how we can stop it, I'm honestly not sure.
Yeah,
Sorry,
well,
that's not very optimistic.
No, I was going to say, but to build off of that, you know, I'm going to flip it, right? Where as you talk about misinformation, so much of it is dependent on the consumer, right? And sorry, going back to the intellectual property brain in me, you know, we have trademarks for a reason, and somebody alluded to the brand, right? So, you know, when you have a trademark, you know, I've got a Temple Tea, that stands for something, right? And could be another brand, Bloomberg, it could be Nike, it could be Google, right? And within those brands, there is an element of building credibility and trust with the consumer. And that's why governments will go out and provide protection so that that trademark, you know, is not infringed, right? Somebody doesn't copy that. And part of that is really that credibility and reliability. But what we're hearing is the brands of a lot of the traditional media have been under attack for years, right? And so, you know, you've got the consumers that they're confused. It's like, okay, you know, do I really believe in this brand? Whether it's, you know, NHK, TBS here, whether it's NBC, CBS in the United States, whatever it might be, you know, those are under attack. So that's part one. You know, part two is, and this comes back to the literacy that we've been talking about. I think folks are so confused about what is information, what is misinformation. And that goes back to my point about, okay, what is real intelligence? And this is the problem, right? I mean, how do you stamp a piece of information with credibility, right? I mean, there's certain segments of society where you've got, you know, a certification, like it's a certified, you know, brand, fact, quality, whatever it is. There's just so much information that's out there that, sure, we could come up and certify this information as correct, but there's so much information, sewage, right, you know, that's being spewed, that's out there, that it becomes so difficult. It's a problem that is above and beyond journalists because there's so much out there, right? The theme is anybody can go out and start to spew things, and then what is that fact and what's that reality? I don't know. I mean, I would love to suggest a certification of factual information system that's out there so that people could go and go, okay, I know this is real, and the rest of it is not. But I just don't know how we get there as a society, right?
But how do you do that when the political class itself is invested in the disinformation? I mean, that's what's happening in America, right?
Exactly, and that's exactly what it is, right? Because the government could come and say, no, this is certified information, which, to your point, I think that's happening right now. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the challenges to democracy, is because you do have governmental institutions and regimes for their own accords that are going and interpreting things or creating things that are out there. It's a really, really difficult problem that I think is, you know, it's really probably one of the biggest challenges that's facing society today.
So I just want to build, because I would have said everything you said, but there's something, this is actually why I'm here doing this sort of world tour on this, speaking about this whole thing. The bigger problem is we've lost the monoculture, right? The monoculture being the, oh, sorry. the monoculture being the media landscape where everybody
Is it on? I'm not sure.
He's not loud voiced. I got a loud voice.
You don't need a mic.
No. Here we go.
It might not
Thanks.
get
Yeah.
picked up by the,
The monoculture being this, the what we had, say, post World War II, where everybody watched the same TV channels, read the same magazines and newspapers. There was a thing. We are in this weird period, and it happened very quickly, where we've been calling it feudal media, where people have just retreated into these little bubbles and they don't interact with each other. So to your point, they never see somebody else calling it false because they don't ever see that media. They stay in their little bubbles, whether it's on TikTok or YouTube or TV or some Substack. I mean, my son works in politics in the U.S., and he said, the problem isn't that people are getting their news from right-wing sources. The problem is they're not getting news, period. They can choose to avoid the news because they can live in a little bubble, and to them it's just like this thing that's going on in the background, and they don't need to care, whereas not that long ago, you couldn't avoid seeing what was going on. So that's the other part of the issue, is people just have tuned out of it, and I don't know how to solve that.
Right, and then, sorry, but another issue is that the tech companies have monetized conflict, right? Emotion, that kind of left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. Every time you go online and you fight about it, which I often do, on Facebook or whatever, on Twitter, you're putting money in the pockets of the tech companies. That's the structure we live in, right? So it's got to be some kind of policy, I think.
And you're also spreading the fake news, because every time somebody comes on and says, you see this thing this person said, it's fake. Well, I didn't see it beforehand, but now I did. So.
I sense quite a high degree of pessimism and fatalism in the room at the moment. Does anyone have anything more optimistic to say about
Solutions.
Well, we're pushing the boulder up the hill. Was it Sisyphus? I didn't have a classical education, but
So if I could, Sisyphus.
what can we as representatives of the legacy media do? Given that the fire hose is never going to get switched off, but surely we're not just going to be passive observers to all of this and let it unfold. Well, what could we do? What can we do as responsible journalists? I'll ask the panel first, and then if anyone among the audience wants to offer some ideas, that would be great. So let's go in the opposite direction. Isabel first, please.
I was hoping you weren't going to come to this. I have to solve the problems of the media. I think to go first to the pessimistic side again, I think one of the issues is that there is now a lot of downright hostility to the traditional media. It's not just a question of not believing it. It's actively being disliked in some quarters. I'm sorry, I don't have a solution. I think that I just plan to go on doing what I've been doing, trying to spread our work as widely as possible, because I believe what we're doing is worthwhile. That's become harder. I mean, we used to actually use social media to get attention for our stories. That's not a way to get attention for news stories anymore. People are not using things like Twitter to access traditional media anymore. So we're having to find other ways. A lot of our readership actually comes through Google search now. So what we have to do to maximize attention for our stories is to make sure that we get as many sort of hits as possible through there. But yeah, I think perhaps our opinion people need to get out there and put pressure on governments. I mean, I know this is not going to work in the US right now, but perhaps we can be optimistic that a future government might look at this as an issue that they need to start to control and work from there. But for the moment, I think things are a little bit gloomy at the moment, but perhaps in the future things can get better.
Yeah, and I think I'm circling back to what I was talking about before. I think it comes to how do you build credibility, right? I mean, how do you strengthen your brand? And particularly when brand is under attack from whatever quarters, justified or not, You've got perception and you've got reality, and sometimes perception becomes reality, as much as I hate to say that. And so whether there's a solution out there or not, I don't have the solution. But I do think that there's value with the traditional media to be in the trenches with the 30 and unders. And so, at least in my TikTok feed, and you'll see me on social media a lot, because I know that's where my students and my future students are standing up. So if you're not following Temple University's social media, you can see me stop a truck that's about ready to hit me with my special powers. Now, if that didn't tap into your curiosity, hopefully you can look it up and you can actually see. But part of it is actually being in the trenches. And on my TikTok feed, I am getting more and more traditional media coming in, with the 10-second snippets or the 15-second snippets that's competing against the untrained journalists that are there as well. And folks will, how the algorithm works, you can't control that necessarily. But, is there a way? One of the things, you'd mentioned the Google searches. One of the concerns is with AI and ChatGPT coming on in, people aren't going to go to Google anymore. They're just going to go to ChatGPT, type it in, whatever answer comes out. Okay, now, God is speaking again. And so, how do you kind of adapt to that? It's a constantly evolving process, and I think that's maybe where the brainstorming needs to be, is, okay, how do you rebuild that credibility? How do you rebuild that brand? And part of that's being in the trenches. I think maybe part of that is appealing to a higher authority. Part of that, though, has to be, and a big part of it, how do you get to the consumers? And how do you kind of get that credibility in? I'm hoping that there will be, on a positive note, an evolution where people, and we're seeing it right now, I mean, the conflict is becoming so severe that I hope at some point in time we take a pause and we're like, okay, this conflict that we're seeing is bad. We need to get back to basics. We need to have conversations. We need to have understandings, because if not, we're going down a very dark pathway, and we need to turn back, towards something that's better. So.
Okay, I think, the panel composition was based on educators, professional journalists, people who hopefully will or do have, and the way kind of Justin phrased the question, we should have an evangelical role in making young people passionate about the vocation, making people, or hopefully imbuing trust in people in what we're doing, and trying to raise the bar, even in an age where there is a lot of sewage. And if I think about it, when young people are in an environment where the volume of content is so overwhelming that they can't kind of comprehend, what should I place trust in? What should I pay for? What should I, kind of design my democratic understanding of society from? We have a responsibility to kind of advance the education on multiple tiers, be it academically, through the work we do, through the training we have of young journalists, why it matters, why the contribution to society that journalists still make is worth a damn. And, it's not a great career for economic return. It has a lot of hardship and late hours and, brutal conditions sometimes, terrible conditions if you're in places like the Ukraine or Gaza right now. But the people who are wedded to this, they're passionate, they're heroes, they're bringing content that the world needs amid sewage. And that, if we can kind of galvanize it as a career that matters, hopefully more people will be wedded to it.
Well, I mean, a couple of positive things. First of all, some media organizations have done quite well, right? I mean, The Economist did quite well, and the New York Times did quite well under Trump, and Bloomberg's doing well. And I think there is that kind of thirst for, as I said, rigorous, fact-based, accurate journalism, and I think people will go to it if you can pay for it, right? That's the point, isn't it? If you can pay for it, and they'll compare, and smart people, intelligent people will compare what Bloomberg does with what somebody. I'm just reading the story of Candace Owens, for example, right? This conservative blogger, 7 or 8 million followers, who's staked her whole career on saying that the French president's wife is a man, and it's obvious it's such a fake story, but she's got all her 7 million followers, wherever, buying into it, right? So you can compare what Bloomberg does and The Economist does to that. There was a famous quote from Bill Clinton when he was president that regulating the internet was like trying to nail Jello to the wall. I'm sure you know that famous quote. But I do think there's this movement, certainly in Europe now, to try and regulate the internet. I do think it's a very unpopular opinion, but I do think there's got to be policy involved. For example, in Ireland, they've banned children setting up social media accounts. In Finland, they have made media literacy classes compulsory in high school. There's those things happening, and you can see where this could go. It can go that way, which would be some kind of regulation, or it can go another way, which is more sewage.
I'll give you just because you're probably sick of
Just
hearing me
briefly,
talk.
and then we'll have another question. Yeah.
I'll just be quick. I mean, the one area, and Matt, you touched on it, is I mean, it's not that ChatGPT is going to replace Google. It already is. Like, there's companies out there now that are doing things called GEO, and the hope is that you can train the AIs when they actually stop making mistakes to actually rank news on its credibility and to serve up the more credible news sources to people when they search for things, and that will be actually the solution. It's pretty damn positive.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, I'm Sayoko Oyama from FCS Global, Strategic Comms Agency. It's been super interesting discussion from sort of PR and comms perspective as well, so thank you so much. I have a quick question. So in the age of AI, what would you say about the sort of new skills that needs to be taught in terms of journalism, and are there any sort of the skills that no longer needs to be taught or less important than before?
Good question.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, AI sort of help or hindrance, or perhaps a little bit of both. But Dave, do you want to start on that?
Well, I'll give you an example, right? So we have a component, English literature, so English majors in our university. And what the students do now is they get their K-tie, their cell phone, and if you write something on the board in English, they'll hold their K-tie up and it will translate it into Japanese. And then they will write their answer in Japanese, translate it back using DeepL into English, and show it to you or say it to you, right? So it's entirely possible to get to an English literature degree now, whatever, speaking English, So yeah, I think AI is really doing a lot of those jobs. Like, I would say that is a big example of a job which used to be a tremendous chore, right? Which is translating what's happening. They used to have people at the embassies whose job it was to translate the domestic media for diplomats and things. Now it can all be done with AI, and that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, if you were in journalism and society class at Temple this week, timely as it is, we're focused on AI. The whole conversation has been about AI Wednesday and tomorrow. And the first thing we looked at was essentially, what are the benefits of AI in journalism, potentially, and what are the demerits? What are the flaws, not just on potentially job contraction, but the facet of no longer having a human overseeing the output of journalism because it's AI kind of generated headline, AI generated scores, weather, whatever. And I think, again, from an educational perspective, I think number one, young people aren't aware that there's this kind of non-human world that's punting out their content anymore. And so kind of making them more discerning, making them more skeptical, making them more critical of what perhaps they're seeing and where it's coming from is crucial. And I think that will be something that goes on. I was reading, essentially there are already solely AI-generated content that is going into the waterworks, so to speak. But again, making the young journalist or young person more cognizant of being discerning is an imperative for education.
Thanks, Dan. Apparently we have to wrap up fairly soon, so Matt and Isabel, if you've got fairly brief comments to make.
2 words: fact-checking. What comes out of AI? Is it true? Is it not? That needs to be highlighted and taught.
Mine's a bit less dramatic, but I think I think from what I've been looking at the trends in the newsroom, I think sub-editing is something that we could be handing over to AI sometime in the future. So if you have a job as a sub-editor, you should be looking for another skill in your life, probably.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I do apologise because I think we all said the word sewage at least once.
I started it, sorry.
Yeah,
Could have been worse.
You turned on the fire hose. Thank you to our panelists, to David, Dan, Isabel, and Matt. Now, 4 out of 5 of us sitting here are members of the FCCJ. 1 isn't, so I'd like to do something about that and to thank Matt for his great contributions this evening, to give him a 1-year honorary membership of the FCCJ. Come back and see us. Thank you. Once again, thanks very much for coming, and I don't know when the next event will be or what the theme will be, but I hope it's as good as this one has been. I had a really great evening. Thank you.
And thanks to David Omano for organizing this.
Thank you, David.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.